presentation is Helping All People Flourish, and that is going to be presented by Kody Russell, who is the Executive Director of Kitsap Strong. And we are so excited to have him here this evening. Kody has over 10 years of experience working with children and families in the child welfare system. As we all know, children in the system have experienced significant trauma and struggled. There are several problems that are social and health related, including mental health illnesses, substance abuse disorders, aggression, child abuse, neglect, anger, hostility, sexual behavior issues, homelessness, poverty, just to name a few. Kody is as I said, the Executive Director, one of 25 state certified trainers in the Neuroscience, Epigenetics, we'll say NEAR, N-E-A-R, what that stands for, Neuroscience, Epigenetics, and First Childhood Experiences, ACEs, and Resiliency. That's a mouthful. Olympic College is a participant and sponsor of Graduate Strong, which is a part of Kitsap Strong. The Graduate Strong network of community organizations and local school districts that work together to ensure that all students in our community have capabilities, connections, and credentials needed to flourish. All of these things will make our community better. So, without further ado, help me to welcome Kody Russell.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much for coming out on a rainy evening, for being here with me in the beautiful Olympic College. Thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to be here. We kind of operate, as a community organizer, I operate on the principle that whoever's here are the right people for the conversation. So thank you so much for being here and being the right people to engage in this conversation tonight. I'm going to move the mic down a little bit because it seems to pick up literally everything that I do. Is that better? All right, wonderful. So we're going to dive in, have some fun tonight. This is not going to be maybe a typical lecture series where it's just me talking to you. My hope is that we are engaging in dialogue together, that we're learning from each other. I believe deeply that the wisdom is in our community, and I want us to tap into that wisdom that already exists. So I just want to acknowledge that our time together is a social gift. Honor that by starting on time, ending on time. I want to introduce to you a conversation that is much, much longer and deserves much more attention than we have time for tonight. So if you're left with that sense of, I want more, or he didn't answer all my questions, that's exactly what I'm hoping to do tonight, is not answer all your questions, to leave you wanting to understand and wanting to know more, because it's a conversation that we're hoping to spark in our community, not to close tonight. So advocate for what you need, leave the rest. I'm a presenter who believes deeply in acknowledging everyone has their own unique safety needs, and that it's really hard to learn if you don't feel safe. So do what you need to do to take care of you, because one of the fundamental things that we're understanding, the more we learn this science of human behavior, the better we understand this, the more that we recognize that it's hard to learn if you don't feel safe. And in your handout, hopefully everyone got one of these. In your handout, you're going to see some pages in here that cover the basic information that I'm going to go over in the PowerPoint. And then you're going to see some great information about some language that we're trying to develop in our community, working definitions so that we can have conversations, some difficult conversations in our community. And on there, you're going to see safety. So we acknowledge that it's hard to learn if you don't feel safe. So if we were standing out in the middle of rush hour traffic and I was asking you to solve a math problem, that's probably a difficult situation to solve a math problem, even if you're good at math. That's physical safety, but there's other forms of safety. Like if you're here in the room saying to and about yourself that I'm no good, I'm not smart, it's really hard to learn if that's the internal, there's literally different neurons that are activating in your brain when you say I'm not smart versus when you say I'm awesome, I'm brilliant, right? So we want to create a space tonight for safety so that we can engage in a conversation. And this is what other audiences, much like you, have told me help them feel safe. A sense of humor, not to make fun of childhood trauma, but as a tool to have difficult conversations. One more note of consideration is I notice that we have little ears in the room, so I want us to be careful. I invite your questions and your conversations, but I want you to be careful about the language that you use, just because we have some little ones here tonight, okay? So safety, respect, humor, openness. Is there anything additional we should add that would help you feel safe for our conversation here tonight? I agree, little man. So silence is golden, right? As a facilitator, I love that. So one of the things that is also a form of safety is volitional safety, meaning that you always have choice. But if you're willing to lean into a little bit of maybe awkwardness and discomfort, I would invite you to turn to someone near you, because I do truly believe that the wisdom is already here in the room. I want us to start from this. I want you to turn to someone near you, and I'm going to give you about 60 to 90 seconds. And I want you to reflect upon what is it that helped you grow into the beautiful, amazing human that you are. So thinking about thriving, when I say thriving, I mean being able to reach your full potential and contribute to our community in a meaningful way. You're all here tonight, learning, trying to advance and improve yourself, trying to grow. So by my definition, you're all thriving. But I don't want to put a label on you. Maybe you don't feel like you're thriving tonight, and that's okay. So you could reply instead, I would have thrived better if. But what I want you to do is reflect upon the experiences, the relationships, the opportunities that helped you grow into the beautiful, amazing human that you are. What were the experiences that helped you find something that you're amazing at? So turn to someone near you, and in 90 seconds, tell them why you're awesome, and hear from them what makes them awesome. Okay, so turn to someone near you. Hopefully you can find someone near you and share a little bit about yourself. All right, thank you so much for leaning into that. I appreciate it. We're going to do this one more time. And so I'll look for my cue to wrap up, but I want you to turn to a new human this time. Find a new human, hopefully. And what I would like you to do is, when you're thinking about thriving, what are your biggest concerns for children and adults in our community today? So when you're thinking about them being able to reach their full potential and contribute to our community in meaningful ways, what do you see happening in our community that is the most concerning for you? So turn to someone new, please, and share your biggest concerns. All right, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you for leaning into that. So we're gonna take this to another step, and now I'm gonna invite something that I hope will work. I'm gonna turn my eagle ears on, and I'm gonna ask you to use your outdoor voice for me. What I want you to do is to shout out to me. We're gonna do what we call popcorn response. I want you to shout out to me either something that you heard that really resonated with you, or something that you want to share with the room. When you're thinking about thriving and people being able to reach their full potential, what is it that you think all people need if they're going to reach their full potential and flourish in our community? Family. Stability. Support. Purpose and self-confidence. With your permission, I'm going to say basic needs. Extend that a little bit further. I heard another one that I missed. Jesus Christ. Of faith. Responsibility. Culture. Responsibility.
Goals and directions.
Direction.
Someone who believes in
Vision. Nature. I know I missed some other ones here. Family, stability, support, purpose, self-confidence, basic needs, faith, culture, nature, Belonging, I think I heard. Responsibility, direction, vision. Someone who believes in them. Boundaries.
Nutrition.
Love. Happiness. Beautiful. So as I anticipated, you already know as much as the greatest minds in the globe researching resiliency. Right? So give yourselves a pat on the back, right? Yeah, that's right. We got this. Why? Guess who they're studying? You. They bring together people who say that they're flourishing, and they say, how are you doing this? And this is what they uncover, is that if we're going to reach our full potential, if we're going to flourish, we need these three things. First and foremost is, where did I write that down? The first is individual skills that we develop through experiences and opportunities, right? So you have experiences, you have some opportunities, you have some responsibility, you have access to resources, someone gives you some support, and then you start to learn that you can do something and you do it well. Quick show of hands, who here is a shoe tire, meaning that they can tie their shoes? Yeah. Think about the process that you learned to tie your shoes. Did someone just put a shoe in front of you and you magically tied that shoe? No. When we think about all of the skills that we need, we learn them through the same process that we learn to tie our shoes. It's through practice. It's through modeling, having someone else there showing us how to tie the shoe. It's through coaching, someone telling us, hey, good job. No, do this differently. And it's through repetition. Practice, modeling, coaching, and repetition. That's how we learn all these skills. There's one other skill. So I saw you all raise your hands. Put your hands up in the air again. Okay, this is the hand model of the brain. Right here is the brain stem. This is the emotional core of our brain. This is the part that takes over if we're in danger, fight, flight, and freeze. This right here is the part of the brain that's involved if we're going to tie our shoe. Planning, prioritizing, decision-making, complex problem-solving, language skills, all of those are neurons that happen up here. And when we become emotional, when we flip our lid, we act from a place of emotion, those skills kind of go offline. That makes sense? So you need the individual skill. You need to know that you're good at something, that you can do something and do it well. But you also need the skill that the researchers call self-regulation. You need to be able to put the brakes on emotional outbursts. Otherwise, you may be exceptional at something, but it'll be difficult for you to share that gift with the world because you struggle to calm down in the heat of the moment. So you may struggle to maintain relationships. You may struggle to stay employed. So that's one thing that we need, individual capabilities and skills. The second thing that we need if we're going to reach our full potential is relationships with caring and competent people. We need people who set boundaries, who give us stability and support, so show us love, tell us that we're good at something, but then also keep us safe, and they provide for our basic needs. Because you can have relationships with people who show you love, and then also harm you emotionally, physically, sexually. And those can be challenging relationships to have. And the third thing that we know, if people are going to reach their full potential, they need a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection, deep connection to something larger than themselves. Faith, culture, spirituality, nature, an acknowledgement that we live and exist in relationship with other things. So when we have those three things, individual capabilities and skills, relationships with caring and competent people, and a connection to something larger than ourselves, we flourish. So when you're thinking about flourishing, what are your biggest concerns that you see in our community today? Fear? No home? Internet? Negativity? Mental health and drug addiction? Abuse, child abuse and neglect. That's the shorthand for child abuse and neglect. Addiction, drugs and addiction. Lack of connection.
Watching our presidents freak out on TV.
Yeah. Whew. Man, lack of leadership? I don't know what to say there, yeah. Just, I think it's just hatred and discrimination. Isms, racism, sexism, homophobia, social injustice. I think these are really important things that we pay attention to. When we already identified that belonging and connection are necessary for flourishing, when a part of your identity becomes a source of hatred and discrimination, that's really, really challenging to navigate our community. What you just identified is some of what the researchers call adverse childhood experiences, or what we use the term ACEs for short. So experiences like growing up in a household where there is mental health issues, where there is drugs, where there's abuse and neglect. But you also identified many other potential sources of what the researchers now call toxic stress. And this is why I start every conversation I have the luxury of leading in our community like this. Because you, as community members, acknowledge that there are many other sources of toxic stress that don't fit nicely in the 10 adverse childhood experiences that the researchers originally constructed in the early 1990s. And when we think about this, when I use the term toxic stress, literally what I'm talking about is how some experiences can get underneath our skin, impacting us at a very deep level. So I'm trying to draw for you here something that maybe you've seen before, maybe not. It's not a good drawing, I know that. I think I heard it. DNA? Yes. So when I use the term toxic stress, when the researchers use the term toxic stress, literally what they're describing is that some experiences, like growing up in a household where there's physical abuse, where there's substance use, where there's mental health challenges, growing up in a community where there's hatred and discrimination, where there's injustice, those experiences can actually impact the expression of your DNA and your developing brain in such a way that you your teeter-totter pushes this direction. This is called the fulcrum. Pushes this direction, meaning you're going to need more of these things throughout your entire life to help balance your teeter-totter out or to tip you in the direction of positive health outcomes down here. Similarly, growing up in a household or in a community where you find love and support, where there's connection, where you're given safety and stability, a sense of purpose, a sense of direction. You're wrapped in a community that shows you love and support, and you're encouraged and someone's helping you build those skills around self-regulation. Your brain and your bodies adapt to those lived experiences in such a way that our fulcrum pushes this direction, meaning we were, quote, more resilient to these experiences throughout the life course. So what I've just summarized for you here rapidly by bringing your wisdom, your statements forward, is what we call the Neurosciences. N stands for neuroscience, which is literally the study of how our brains adapt to the experiences that we have throughout our life. E stands for epigenetics, which means on top of genetics. It's the study of how our DNA and the expression of our DNA changes. Some things get turned up, turned down, turned on and off. Some of our genes change based on what we experience in life. You all know this, even if you've maybe never heard the word, because this is what's happening with my beard. Your hair changes color throughout your life because of epigenetics. We age because of epigenetics. A stands for adverse childhood experiences, or this bundle of concerns that we see impacting our community. And R is the shorthand for resiliency, the things that we see that can balance out people's teeter-totters. So we're going to revisit this, but I'm going to continue moving us forward and having this conversation. Because, as I mentioned, some experiences literally do get underneath your skin. Some experiences have a deeper impact than others. It's from this context we need to envision two very different and distinct paths through the world. Let's take this little kid up here at the top. We're going to call him Johnny. And Johnny is exposed to danger. Johnny's living in a household where there's violence, where there's substance use, where there's mental health challenges. Johnny is constantly living in fear. What are some behaviors or characteristics you may develop if you're growing up in an environment where you're constantly living in fear? Isolate. Anxiety. Hypervigilance. Violent. PTSD, sure. Sure, yeah. Depression.
Inability to connect with others.
No trust and connection. Self-blame, absolutely. And that often can sometimes turn into what we call self-soothing, where you're seeking out support through the use of substances and other things like that. Manipulate, sure. So, fundamentally, what I need us to understand and think about is that you're adapting and developing the skills you need to navigate a world that is not safe. And that any of us exposed to that environment would develop similar capabilities and skills in order to survive. Now let's envision another life path. A little boy, little girl is growing up in a house where there's love, there's safety, there's security. Each time he or she cries or coos, somebody picks them up, changes their diaper, responds to their needs. What are some behaviors or characteristics you may develop in that context? Trust, nurturing, happiness and confidence, naive, sure. Everybody's cool, yeah, everybody's safe, right? Yeah. Carelessness, maybe. Positive relationships. Love. Good problem-solving skills. Entitlement, sure. You've fundamentally developed a set of skills around people, process, and possibility that help you navigate a world that is safe. So what you were just describing for me there, what we just rapidly articulated was how our brains would adapt to those different experiences. And that it's the experiences that result in different neurological skills. And I also want us to acknowledge that these sets of skills alone are neither good or bad. That there are some environments where you need to have these sets of skills. If you don't, you may be so naive that you don't survive, right? If you're in danger and you don't have a set of skills to help you navigate that, if you're in stress and you don't know how to manage stress, if you've never been asked to do difficult things and held accountable for those difficult things, you may not have the skills to do those things. You may have a sense of entitlement and be naive, and that's not going to help you navigate some settings. Now, similarly, you may have experiences where you're going to need to show trust and love and nurture and happy and have these capabilities and skills, and that those skills come online in different experiences. So it's from this context that I want us to understand that we are always adapting to our world, and that those early experiences have profound influence. So let's continue this conversation. You're Johnny. You've adapted well. You respond really well in moments of danger and moments of crisis. Where might you flourish in our community as an adult? You become an adult, you're ready to go out and find a job. Where are these skills going to help you? First responders. Our military. Absolutely. What if you're this little boy or girl and you've developed the skills you need based on your experiences, but you want to be a first responder, you want to be in the military, you want to be a firefighter? How do we help you develop the skills you're going to need? Training. And what does that training look like? Is it a series of PowerPoints? This is you getting on your firefighter gear. Now, I certainly hope not, right? There are two things I think make that training process effective. Think back to how you learned to tie your shoes. First and foremost, safety. We started out our conversation tonight acknowledging that it's hard to learn if you don't feel safe. The second thing is the way in which they teach that. Practice, modeling, coaching, and repetition. So I have a question for all of us tonight, is where is the boot camp for Johnny who's adapted and developed the skills he needs? Where is the boot camp for Johnny to learn about people, process, and possibility? We may not have it, because our assumption is everybody's living this life path, and if they show up in our school, at our work, with those sets of behaviors, they isolate, they're anxious, they're hypervigilant, they're violent, they're depressed, they're manipulative. We have a set of ways that we talk about those behaviors. We call them maladaptive, delinquent, and we shame, blame, and punish. I challenge us here tonight to start to acknowledge that these are adaptive responses to different lived experiences, and that we as a community can create the boot camp experience that everyone needs to develop the skills that we're asking them to have when they walk into our social settings. So it's when the expectations of society collide with the way that you've adapted when we run into challenges. So one of your handouts here really quick, and I think this is relevant for any employer in our community, any parent in our community. These are the skills that employers say they need the most on their job site. So I put them all up there. And then I got to thinking about how many of those skills go offline when we're under stress? How many of those skills go offline when we're acting from a place of emotion, or when we flip our lid? And I would say that most of those skills, if not all of those skills, are dependent upon our ability to self-regulate, our ability to calm down. And that those skills are built through the boot camp of relationship. And that if you've navigated an early environment where you haven't had those safe, trusting relationships, then we as a community have a responsibility to create a boot camp so that everyone can have those experiences that will develop the neurological skills that we as employers and community members need the most in the people who navigate our community and serve us. So it's really a story, this larger conversation is a story of discovery. It's about this science information starting to inform how we build systems and how we provide services. Because when we understand this science, when we understand that our brains and bodies are always adapting to our experiences and are always trying to help us survive, in addition to thinking of our brain like the hand model of the brain, I think of our brain like a garden. And when you are born, an infant is born with every connection that they need to survive. So you're not bringing home a tiny seed, you're bringing home a small plant. It already has the branches and the roots in its brain that it needs to survive. So what does a baby need to do at the moment of birth if it's going to survive? Breathe, eat, sleep, cry, coo, right? Connect. You take a picture of a human face, you turn it upside down, a baby still sees a human face. We see faces different than every other object in the world. We group the eyes, the nose, and the mouth into one single image. Why would we see faces different than anything else? Because an infant knows that its survival is totally dependent upon connection. The very first thing that we do when we're under stress is actually, before we go to fight or before we go to flee, the first thing we do is flock. The very first thing, think about it. Somebody says something really bizarre. You're riding the bus through downtown Bremerton. Somebody says something really weird. What do? You look around. Did anybody else hear that? Right? You want to find somebody else to be like, okay, you heard that too, right? Like that was weird, right? We first go to flock when we're under stress. And it's if we can't flock, if we can't find someone to connect and help us in a stressful time, that we then will go to fight or flees. Or fight, flees. You guys get it, whatever. All right. So it's from this context that we're introducing this science around adverse childhood experiences. And I'm just going to fly through this in the interest of time. But I want you to understand that it's the largest study of its kind, over 17,000 individuals. It was retrospective, meaning it was asking them about the first 18 years of their life. And it was prospective, meaning they're continuing to follow the people involved in the study. The demographics of the study are what's most intriguing and important for us to pay attention to. This is a predominantly white, wealthy, and highly educated population because they were enrolled in a preventative health care plan in San Diego, California in the early 1990s. That was who they had access to. So if you were to think about who probably had the resources and opportunities to grow up and flourish, you would think white, wealthy, and highly educated. So when the researchers started this, they were shocked to see that this is actually what the study participants told them. Those 17,000 predominantly white, wealthy, and highly educated people, 28% said that they grew up in a household where there was physical abuse. 21% said that they'd experienced sexual abuse. The researchers couldn't believe that this was true. Rather than focusing on any one of these adverse experiences, the researchers focused on the total clustering of adversity that people were experiencing. Because when there's one adverse childhood experience in the life of a child, there tend to be others. In fact, 87% of the time when there's one, there's another. I can tell you in 10 years here in the state of Washington doing child welfare, never once did I work with a family where there was only one adverse childhood experience. There might have been a reason, a concerning bruise, and that's why a nurse gave me a call. But when we got to talking and investigating, we always found other things happening in that family. There was violence, mental health, substance abuse, homelessness, poverty, many, many things occurring in the lives of our families. So rather than paying attention to one adverse experience and how severe it was, the researchers acknowledged that it was maybe more important from a neuroscience perspective to pay attention to the clustering of adversity. And here's what we find. Just like if I could show you the teeter-totter, if you think about that teeter-totter image, with each ACE, so each one of those experiences that you said yes to, you would have an ACE score of 1, 2, 3, 4. And with each one of those, there's an increased likelihood of developing health and social challenges across the lifespan. It's what they call a dose-response relationship. Think of it like gallons of gas, the more miles you can drive. So I mentioned that tonight we're kind of thinking about employment because that's what OC offers to our community. It's a pathway for people getting the credentials that they need so that they can support themselves and their family in our community. So in this context, we need to start thinking about what is it that's impacting people's job performances in our community. And we see as people's adverse experiences go from 0 to 4 or more, we see absenteeism increase. We see serious financial challenges increase. We also see serious job problems increase. So ACEs are highly common, they're interrelated, and they're powerful. There's this intergenerational transmission. Because sometimes the way that we may be coping with our own lived experiences and our own adversity may influence the experiences of the next generation of children. So if we're coping through the use of substances, we may be creating an environment of inconsistency that our own children may be experiencing. So, who's seen one of these signs before? Okay. Why do you think the World Health Organization and our own health district pay lots of money to put these signs up everywhere? Prevent disease, one disease in particular. The flu. 5% of the flu is associated with people who just don't wash their hands. And if everyone washed their hands, we could eliminate 5% of the deaths associated with the flu. 5% is the magic number when they do this complex statistical analysis called population attributable risk. So Dr. Anda, one of the original researchers on this study, was doing this. He'd worked at the CDC for 20 years and he'd never seen a number below 5%. So he was home alone in his study. He plugged in his ACEs data into that same calculator and this is what he saw. The lowest number on there is 14% of people not graduating from college or technical school. 14% of people not completing their trajectory at OC College is associated with adverse childhood experiences. That's almost 3 times the magic 5% number. 78% of IV drug use, 65% of alcoholism, 62% of homelessness, which is not on there, 69% of all mental illness that we see in our community is associated with adverse childhood experiences. Notice I say associated. I didn't say caused. We understand that washing your hands or not washing your hands doesn't cause the flu, but there's a powerful association in how we transmit germs. If you're sitting there and you're calculating your own ACE score, I challenge you not to, because ACEs don't have value at an individual level. It's only a small part of this whole picture. But at a population level, we start to see patterns. And at a population level, these are the patterns that emerge. And this is why Kitsap Strong, which is a network of organizations, exists. Because it doesn't matter which slice of the pie you're most passionate about, we're all connected through that oil slick in the middle. And as we in our community collaborate to reduce adversity in the next generation and shrink this oil slick, we can have major cost savings across all those domains. And even if we're not effective at shrinking adversity in the next generation, we can, through collaborating, build resiliency in everyone and help people flourish. I wanted to also share with you just rapidly here some data here from our own community. So we gathered these same questions in Washington State in 2009 to 2011, and we found that 37% of our local Kitsap residents have 3 or more of those adverse childhood experiences. Something you need to know, if you're questioning this data, you should, because we gathered it via telephone. How many people feel super comfortable disclosing their childhood trauma history over a telephone to a total stranger? And we only asked about 8 of the questions instead of all 10 because we couldn't get all 10 questions through the rigorous protocol to get them asked. So sadly, this is a massive underrepresentation of the adversity in our community. And we also see some variance across our community. We go from 11 to 21% having 3 or more ACEs to 39 to 51% of this red area having 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. But there's this dose-response relationship. So now, not only does that same area of our community have 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, they have 6 or more adverse childhood experiences. 12 to 22% of our Bremerton and Port Orchard neighbors have 6 or more adverse childhood experiences. These families don't have 1 or 2 challenges they're dealing with. They have a myriad of challenges that they're up against. So it's from this context that we need to start thinking about the boot camp that we as a community can build to help everyone in our community flourish. And we know what people need. It's individual capabilities and skills. Everyone is exceptional at something. And if you don't know what you're exceptional at, it's my responsibility through relationship with you to help you figure that out. As the father of 2 children, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help them find what they're exceptional at so that they can get good at it and share that gift with the world. It's about attachment and belonging. It's about relationships with caring and competent people. We know that that's what people need if they're going to reach their full potential. And then it's a connection to something larger than yourself. Community, culture, faith, spirituality, nature. When we have these 3 things, we all flourish. So the change is up to us. We can continue with our current perspective and the way that we're responding to individuals who have adapted to adversity by saying, what's wrong with you? And shaming and blaming. Or we can respond from a context of, what have you experienced? And then from that context, because the way we think about problems determines the solutions that we seek, as we change the way we think about the problems, we can invent new and brilliant solutions. So this is how Kitsap Strong came to be, and this is why we call ourselves Kitsap Strong. We reflected upon how communities show up in times of crisis and adversity. And the adverse childhood experiences is the #1 health crisis facing the globe. But we as community already know how to respond during crisis. And every time we see a crisis, whether it's man-made or natural, we know how to show up. Because resiliency isn't an individual characteristic, it's a community experience. It's about how we show up in each other's lives in times of celebration and in times of crisis. Resiliency is about doing favors for one another. It's about mutual aid. It's about contributing your core gift and receiving the gifts of others. And it's about connecting people with the resources that they need most. In communities where we do this really, really well, we call it high-capacity communities, and we see less adversity, less adverse childhood experiences in the next generation. because it's about how we show up in each other's lives that can transform toxic experiences into tolerable experiences. And this is what Kitsap Strong's trying to do. We are a network of organizations, actually we're a bunch of networks of organizations that are trying to help everyone in our community flourish, to help them all reach their full potential. And since we're here at OC, I wanted to acknowledge that what we're doing is, one of our partnerships is around Graduate Strong. And it's our initiative to try and help everyone get the credentials, the capabilities, and the connections they need in order to flourish. And one of our approaches is what we call trauma-informed care. When we say trauma-informed, I don't really like the terminology, although it may be accurate. It's really more about being human-centered. It's about realizing the prevalence of trauma, understanding how many of us, that 37% of us here in Kitsap have 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. It's understanding what happens to all of us when we're under stress, how we all flip our lids when we're under stress. So the impact that stress has on us. It's about shifting our perspective from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. What have you experienced? It's about focusing on regulation. It's about coaching, practicing, and modeling the skills that we need to calm down when we're about to flip our lid. It's about focusing intentionally on relationship and being mindful about how we develop the skills of relationship. It's about giving people purpose, hope, a reason to be. And it's about caregiver capacity. It's about making sure that this isn't just about the students that we serve or the clients that we work with. This is about each and every one of us. This information is about each and every one of us. So this is our vision with Kitsap Strong. Our goal is to try and promote a trauma-informed community. And we're really excited that you're all here tonight, listening, learning, and hopefully leaning in to this movement with us as we try and build out our capacity in our community to show up and to be resilient. Thank you so much for this honor and privilege to be here tonight. Looks like we've got about 10 minutes or so for some questions. So if people have some questions, we have some mics that we can walk around. I can respond to them as best we can, or we can holler them out. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So for Kitsap Strong, do you have different programs that you guys do?
Yeah, so what do we do? Great question. It's a hard one to answer, so I typically don't. So when I think about Kitsap Strong, I like to think of us as a metaphor. I'm starting to think about a construction site, and you have a huge building that's being built, and you see the temporary scaffolding that's there. So within Kitsap Strong, we have 4 staff members that are kind of the scaffolding that is there to support the work of our community networks. And we have 5 networks, and think about the networks and the agencies within those networks as the platforms on that scaffolding and the workers on each platform. So each network represents one of those platforms, and then we have 75 organizations working with us. Every one of the school districts is involved in the Graduate Strong initiative, where we're coming together to have these sorts of conversations. One of the things that we do in our innovation network is that we fund in our community. So we fund organizations to participate in a year-long learning journey, learning this science over the course of a year, trying to facilitate relationships across organizations in our community to make a stronger web in our community of support for individuals that have not just one issue that they need help with, but lots of issues that they need help with. So we fund organizations in what we call our Collaborative Learning Academy, and we've worked with 37 nonprofits and 9 schools, and we just started another one for 8 schools this school year. In our Healthy Eating Active Living network, we're working with healthcare providers to try and improve access to healthy activities and to food in our community, including kind of a corner store initiative. We're mapping corner stores and trying to encourage them to provide fresh fruits and vegetables, because there's areas in our community where they literally are disconnected from shopping centers and from access to nutrition. Thriving Neighborhoods is a space where we hope to grow as we try and create and work with grassroots initiatives around communities where neighbors are starting to come together and want to show up differently in each other's lives, and we want to support that work. And then the near education is us going out and doing these trainings and then building out a network of other people who do these trainings as well. So we've got about 30 people throughout the Olympic Peninsula region that are doing trainings on this science information to try and improve the way that they provide services in our community. Yeah.
So,
Still didn't answer your question? No, I'm kidding.
well, I just want to like narrow it down. Because
Sure.
That was just really broad.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, do you have different people that go into school, specifically schools? I'm thinking of schools where they're talking about a very specific,
Sure.
specific thing.
Sure.
Resilience, like what are the other things that they're doing?
Yeah. So we tend to work at the agency level. We don't provide direct services other than us doing training. So we work with agencies to have them shift the way that they do work so that every one of our schools is providing the services in the way that they want to. So we do coaching, consultation, training. That's the majority of our work. Thank you. Yeah. I'll repeat your question, so go ahead.
Do you have a resource that you would recommend for new parents who have grown up with ACEs?
Beautiful.
As like a baby, a new baby, in fact.
Yeah, so the question was, are there resources that we would recommend if you're a parent and maybe you're a parent who's experienced some adversity and you're a new parent in our community? I would encourage you to go to our Kitsap Strong website, and there's a whole resource page. Of course, now that if I try and navigate there, I'm sure it won't work. But so there's a bunch of resources on there, and we're continuing to update it right now. So I think some of the best work that you could look at would be Dan Siegel. Resources. So we have some information here on our resources page, but I'm realizing we just developed a new website. So here you'll see all of the resources, and there's links under each one of the bundles of science that we talked about, and a list of great books that could be a resource for you. Brain Rules for Baby, absolutely phenomenal, really easy to read. John Medina's a neuroscientist out of the University of Washington, is absolutely phenomenal, really, really smart. And Dan Siegel, this is probably one of the single best guides for parents. Yeah. Other questions? Back there, yeah.
Yeah, so I recently took one of the ACEs tests.
Yeah.
And there's 10 questions, 10 categories. There's a lot that's left out.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering if you know anything about where the research is going as far as expanding the research, because, like, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about adverse childhood, experiences. So, the elephant in the room is, to me, is a, historic cultural trauma.
Beautiful, yes.
It's not reflected in the questions on the test, and I was wondering if you have any idea where that research is going.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that question into the room. So the question was, the 10 ACEs is not comprehensive of the many sources of trauma, and the mention was the elephant in the room around historical trauma. And the quick answer is that the researchers openly acknowledge that when they created the 10 ACEs questionnaire, they were 2 white doctors who created this based on their perspective of the world, and their perspective was around prevention, because they were prevention experts. So they looked at the research on what we were trying to prevent in the early 1990s, and there's been communities that have pushed back. I think the best resource for you would be the RISE Center, R-Y-S-E, the RISE Center out of California. They published a whole thing called Racing ACEs, and they introduce a whole new layer of the what we call adverse childhood experiences pyramid, including historical trauma and social context. And Philadelphia ACEs study, they added in an additional set of questions that they felt reflected other sources of adversity in their community: racism, bullying, community violence, poverty, homelessness. So they added in several other categories that weren't there. So there's been several attempts to be more comprehensive in the list. Yeah. It is, yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate that. Question over here.
Do you have to have like a bunch of letters behind your name to get a position in ACEs?
No, yeah, it's a great question. I have 3 letters behind my name, but I don't know why I have them there, right? Yeah. I don't need them there. I'll just put it that way. In fact, one of the leaders in this movement nationally, her name's Laura Porter. She started here in Washington State, and she doesn't have any letters behind her name. So the movement is really about, and she's the one who is my idol, my mentor, and I've had the luxury of working alongside her. And she would be the first to say that you are the experts in this information. You don't need credentials to understand this information. And if this is something that you want to be engaged in, this is what we do. We build capacity in our community so that people can go and lead these conversations in different areas. So that's something that we look to do, is build capacity so that many voices have this, because I'm not the right voice for every room. And we want others to be able to take this science and to share it with their community in ways that have value. So, yeah, if there's something that you're interested in, reach out. Yeah. Back there?
Can you flash back on your geography, the Kitsap? Okay, there. So what that says to me is that 6 to 7% of Bainbridge Island people have had more.
Yep, 6 or more adverse childhood experiences.
And 0 to 3 in Paulsville?
Yeah.
By self-reporting at a telephone call.
By self-reporting in a telephone call, absolutely. But I think it is interesting to ask ourselves, right, is that, and I think that that's one of the important things in the adverse childhood experiences study, is an acknowledgement that adversity happens in all contexts, is that it happens even in our wealthy communities, and that may not be what our social perception is, but the reality is that adversity happens everywhere. The social response is very different. If you have wealth and resources, the way society responds to the adversity in your household is very different than if you're living in poverty in our community and there's adversity in your household. I think there was another, yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, with housing costs skyrocketing in Kitsap, people having disastrous problems getting affordable housing, how many children in our Kitsap Port Orchard area, which is the orange number there,
Uh-huh.
what have you, how many of them are not getting the food they need?
Sure.
Programs being shut down as far as feeding children,
Yeah.
even at lunch. What's going on with that? Do you know what the numbers are?
It's a very difficult question. So the question was about children in our community experiencing homelessness. And the quick answer is no, I don't know what the numbers are. We have rough numbers that are very rough because families are unwilling often to disclose it. The way that we capture that data is very problematic because it's self-report. Again, there's challenges wrapped up in it. But I think just to play with that for a second, I think if we think about parents say the number one source of stress, other than their children, in their relationship is financial. So even for families that aren't experiencing homelessness, how many of them are struggling to show up in the way that they want to as parents because they're constantly under stress around finances? And to your broader question around housing affordability, we know in Kitsap County that our families are getting squeezed and that more and more of our families are living literally paycheck to paycheck, where if they miss a single paycheck due to injury or illness, their family will experience homelessness. And they're living with the stress of that knowledge every single day. So I would say that we have a crisis on our hands, and we need to be thinking about it and how we show up and how we support each other. And we need to be pushing back as much as we can, because yes, it's very concerning, not just for the ones who are already experiencing homelessness, but for those who are very close to that pathway in our community if something doesn't change. Go ahead.
How about, you said it's hard to know the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I heard you say something about people don't want to report that they're having a problem. Do teachers, do professional people, when they come across a child who's showing up without enough food, who's showing up who's showing up that they know the problems, do they have a duty to report them, or what's the law there?
Yeah, so, okay, so two more clarities around the experience of homelessness in our community. First and foremost is that the way we capture the data is through a one-night count. So we go out one night a year and try and capture a count of people experiencing homelessness. And oftentimes what we capture is a count of people who are unsheltered, and that doesn't meet the full definition of homelessness, is that you may be sleeping in a car, you may be sleeping at a friend's house, on the couch, something like that, and we may not catch you in that one night count. So that's one of the challenges. The other question was around how do our teachers respond, and I would say we are blessed to have amazing teachers who do incredible things above and beyond to support individuals who are struggling, even if they don't know the full context of what the children are experiencing. So I think it's a really delicate situation, and it's a complex question. I don't want to shut it down, but there's just, it deserves such a longer conversation, and I appreciate you bringing it forward. Yeah, so sorry, the second part of my question is homelessness is not in and of itself constitute child abuse or neglect, so it is not a reportable offense in the state of Washington. And so, you know, a child growing up without housing does not constitute child abuse or neglect. So, go ahead.
There is information on the office of the OSPI, the
Sure.
Superintendent of Public Education. There's information there, and there's also information on the Olympic Education School District site regarding homelessness and, school lunch.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, and our Graduate Strong Network Manager, Allison Roeder, who's not here tonight, would be much better at answering those questions because she actually has all the data. I just don't have it with me right now. But there are places that have the data with the caveat that the data is imperfect, right? And we know that. But yeah, any other questions? Because I think we're pretty much at time, but thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege. I appreciate it.